Hello everyone, welcome to the Clarity 16.1.2 Feature Supportability Training. This is Denise Saladay. I will be covering the changes that we made in this release to investment management. The next topic I'll cover is parent mapping for investments. Administrators will now have the capability to define parent mappings for their investments. In Modern, they can do that by navigating to Administration and navigate to the Attributes tile. And we've added a new tab to collect these definitions called Investment Parents. There are a couple of important things that we need to cover. First is the administrator doesn't need any additional access rights to navigate and have access to the new tab for investment parents. After upgrade, there are no definitions that will exist on this tab, which really means that there will be no restrictions for users. They'll still be able to select any investment type as a parent for all of their investments. So in summary, after upgrade, there's no change in behavior for users. Next, we'll take a look at how you would define a parent mapping that it's allowed. If the administrator wants to add a restriction for a particular investment type, they would do so by clicking Add Investment Type button. Once they do that, they'll have to select an investment type, and it's a single select, so they can only pick one. In the example above, I selected project because I wanted to build a restriction for projects. And by default, under the allowed parent types, which is a multi-select, it will show none. When you have an investment type that has none defined in its allowable parent types, what that means is any users who are updating the parent attribute against the project instances, they will not be able to select any parents because there's not going to be any values for any object types that will show up that they can actually select to populate that value. So it's restricted. But if the administrator wants to restrict projects to only have IDEA parents, then you would just select IDEA in the allowed parent types value. You can see from the bottom screenshot that I've done that for a project. I've also set up an example for ideas, where ideas can have business capability, features, or products as an allowable parent. And you can only have one instance of an object under the investment type. So if I was to go in like I did on the bottom screen shot and try to add the project investment type a second time into the restrictions list, you'll see that I received an error that the project investment type already exists and it won't allow me to do that. You can delete a row in this table here if you select the trash can on hover on the right side. And the administrator can update either the investment type or the allowed parent types columns after they're saved. So the way I have this currently configured is when users are updating the parent attribute for project instances, they'll only see a list of ideas and no other instances that they can select as an allowable parent because we're restricting it. But when they're in ideas, they'll actually be able to see business capabilities, features, and products instances that they can select as an allowable parent. And if there's any other investment types or custom investments that are in the database, those don't have any restrictions. So they'll be able to have any allowed parents. It's important for us to understand how these allowed parent restrictions are enforced for investments. As I described earlier, users will only be able to see instances for allowed parents that are not restricted. If administrators define a new restriction for an investment type and there's pre-existing data already in the parent field for some of those investments that are now restricted, we're not going back and correcting this data. It's up to administrators to go back and update any pre-existing investments that have a parent that's no longer allowed. And this capability is supported for projects, ideas, and custom investment types in the parent attribute. And in the hierarchies workspace, it applies to the parent attribute, but it does not apply to the hierarchical parent. And roadmaps works a little differently because roadmaps, they can be linked to another investment, or they may not be linked to any investment. So if you have a roadmap item and it's linked to, is populated, then its parent is restricted based on the investment type of the link to, the linked instances investment type. But if the link to is not populated on the roadmap item, then there's not going to be any parent restriction. And if you have a roadmap item that did not have a link to value, but it had the parent value populated, once you update the link to value and you add a link to value, it's going to update the parent with a link to items parent, even if that parent is blank. Next, we'll take a look at how these parent restrictions are enforced in the product. For the example we'll be looking at, I've defined the following restrictions. Project can only have idea parents. Idea can have business capability, features, and products. And business capability has none for allowable parents, so it can't have any. So if you look at the screenshot for business capability, which is on the right side, you'll see that whenever you go to try and populate the parent attribute, that the drop-down list says none because there are no parents that are allowed for business capability. In the bottom example, we're looking at projects and we're trying to update the parent. And you can see that the user can only select idea instances because those are the only parents that are allowed for projects. In the bottom screenshot, we're looking at an example in hierarchies and we're looking at a project again. You can see that only ideas are showing up for the parent for the project. And the two screenshots on the right are for roadmap item instances. The top roadmap item example is for a roadmap item that's linked to a project. And you can see that the parent attribute, you can only pick idea instances because it's restricted. The screenshot on the bottom for roadmap items doesn't have any link to item. So you can see that the parent attribute doesn't have any restriction and you can pick any investment. As a demonstration, I'll show you how you can actually define allowable investment types as a parent. And next, we'll take a look at how we can see these parent restrictions in action. The first demonstration will be on how to define investment parent mappings. And under Administration, you'll navigate to the Attributes tile. And as long as you have access to that tile, you will be able to access the new tab that we created to capture these mappings called Investment Parents. By default, there are no restrictions defined here, which means that after upgrade, users will be able to go in and select any investment types that they want as allowable parents for their investments. So to add a restriction, you just click on the Add Investment Type button, and you'll get a list of objects that are in alphabetical order, and we're just going to select Project. This is a single select value here. And by default, the allowed parent type shows up as none. And what that means is any users that are editing projects, whenever they go in to set and populate that parent attribute, they're not going to have any instances to select, because what we're doing is saying that projects do not have any allowed parents. So let's update this to be idea. And then let's add some more restrictions. So we'll add one for idea. And for idea, this is a multi-select here. We'll add a couple of different investments that we want to restrict for parents. We'll say that ideas can have business capability, features, and products. And let's add one more restriction for business capability, and we'll leave that to none. So if you go in and you try to create another row for restriction for project, for example, what will happen is it won't allow you to do that because you've already created one for the project. So I showed you how to update before whenever we updated the project to idea, but to delete these instances, you can just go use the trash can here on the right. And when you're done with your restrictions, you can just exit the screen. So let's navigate into the various workspaces to see how these restrictions are enforced. First, we'll navigate into the Custom Investments workspace, and we'll look at Business Capability, where we define there were no parents allowed. So if we go in here and we try and select a parent for that, you can see that there's no instances to select because it's not allowed to have any parents. Next, let's navigate into the Project workspace. Projects were only allowed to have ideas as parents. So if we go here and try and populate the parent attribute, you'll see that the only thing you can see here are idea instances. One thing that's important to note is if you had any pre-existing data here for projects and you had other parents defined besides ideas before you added this restriction, we don't go in and update this data. It's up to administrators to go in and correct any restrictions that they might have on their parent attributes. Next, let's go into the idea workspace. Ideas were allowed to have 3 parent types. They could have business capability, features, or products. So if you go in and you try and populate the parent, you can see that you have instances from those 3 allowed object types. And there's products. Next, let's navigate into the Hierarchies workspace. And we'll look at this hierarchy. On the Investment tab, you can see that the investments that we have here are all projects. And projects are only allowed to have idea parents. So if I went in and tried to update one of these, you can see that I'm only allowed to select ideas. And last, let's take a look at the Roadmaps workspace. In the Roadmap Items area. The parent is enforced here based on the link to object type. So in this particular roadmap, we have items in here that are linked to project instances, and we have one that isn't linked to any object type. So first, let's try and populate one of them where the link to is set to a project. We'll do this one here. You can see that it only allows you to select ideas, which are the only allowable parents for projects. Now, if you go in and you try and populate a parent for this roadmap item, which doesn't have any link to, there's not any restrictions to define because it's not linked to any particular investment type. So when you go in and populate the parent attribute, you'll be able to select any instance investment type that is in the whole system, even other custom investment types that you might have out there. There's no restrictions defined. And let's just pick one of these. And this concludes the demonstration portion of this topic. And this concludes the supportability training for investment management. Thank you.